We're going to have some questions from our lovely panelists, and we're going to have a chat about the things that you've covered, and then that gives you about half an hour or 20 minutes or so to think about your questions, and then we'll come to the audience, and you can ask Robin some further questions. But I'd just like our panelists to introduce themselves, please. Who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Leticia Sterling. I work for IBM. I've been with IBM for 24 years. Nearly 24 years. Yeah, coming on to 25, and been in the tech industry for 34 years. But I'm not technology focused. I'm very much focused on people. My role is around business transformation, so I'll deliver and support programs of transformation. And one of the mantras of IBM is we make the world work better through the use of technology, but that's the use of technology by humans, and that's what I'm interested in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm Joanna Manelli. I'm a digital policy lead at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So the shorthand for people who don't know what a combined authority is, it's I work for the mayor. That doesn't mean that I know him. It just means we work together. But I think the thing that I want to bring to this discussion again is the human side. I work in digital policy, but again, focus on the policy, not the digital. I'm not a technologist. I've worked in local government, in the public sector, in and around Greater Manchester for the past 20 years. But the thing I really think brings this conversation is in Manchester, we are very fond of saying that we do things differently. We're very fond of saying we do digital differently. And I really believe we do that because much like you said about IBM, we try to think about the use case, the person, the human at the heart of this. And technology in the wrong hands is a travesty, but technology in the right hands, I genuinely believe, having worked in communities, neighbourhoods, some of the most deprived areas of Manchester, I do believe in the right hands it can be transformative. So really interested to sort of explore that in this context.
Fantastic, thank you. So, apart from you revealing the secret that as you become a professor, you get taken aside to give that plummy, slightly camp voice, that's a secret course. You've revealed too much about that now. I just want to sort of kick off perhaps with some of the stuff that we're talking about before your presentation as well, about the role that you see in terms of AI and creativity in terms of that science communication, particularly around important aspects such as cybersecurity.
As in, well, I mean, I think the most important thing, first of all, is, for art and science to work together. And that does mean that quite often technology working with the artist as well. I think there is, even though it might have sounded very negative, I don't mean it. I think there are a huge number. I wanted to talk very specifically about that point once we start to see the artist being extinguished. I think the two working together, but it's always, and like I said, really what I was talking about was the capitalist problem, I think, which is if everything becomes defined by profit, then again, we lose a huge amount of our creativity. So I think there's a huge amount of work to be done to make, like you were talking about the idea of doing a piece of dance that was also about AI. And I love things like that. I love that. One of my favorite books of the last year is called Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. And that's exactly what it is. But it captures both a beautiful level of poetry, also about activism, and also about the science of marine mammals. I think one of the things that it's not, again, in the same way as it's not a binary thing, it's not kind of, I'm a Luddite and I write poetry and I'm someone here destroying the butterflies with my big computer. It's not that kind of, it is finding that area where when we ask the question, why are we doing this? And if the answer is always because financially it will benefit this group of people, then to me that's a failure of human ambition.
Fantastic. Any questions? Who would like to go first?
And you did say that you came across as quite negative. You did. So I guess I wanted to explore a little bit, and I think there were lots of things. I made lots of notes, but it was the end point that I thought was really quite interesting because you talked about where humans fail, that makes us special. So in my world, AI is a tool and it's to be used as a tool. But AI, whether it's a large language model, machine learning, it will learn and it will fail. But at the moment, in our maturity of using that tool, we think if a machine fails, it's bad. If human fails, it's good. We're learning. And I wanted to ask you if you thought about, well, a machine can learn,
Oh, I think machines can learn. And I think that's one of the, as I said, if we get to a point where a machine genuinely has an inner life, then we also have to change our point of how we define the rights of that machine. Because anything that has an inner life, in the same way that I believe with Peter Singer's Great Ape Project, the idea that we should most definitely not, experiment on any animals that we know to have an inner existence. So I think it's very, and I think you're right. I went to see an exhibition at the Science Gallery that used to be at Trinity in Dublin, and it was fail again, better, and it was looking at all of these different technologies and where the failure. But now the trouble is, when we have people who go, we don't want the failure, what we need is the maximizing of success. So as I say again, it's not about the technology, it's about the misuse of technology, and it's about every time we find a shortcut that removes more human beings from being involved, then I think we have to think very hard about why we're doing that. And at the moment we are currently living in kind of quite a shareholder society. And I think we need to make sure that we don't continue with those ambitions. I'm naive, and Hans Rosling had that lovely thing. He wasn't optimistic, he was possibilistic. So I think there's an enormous amount you can gain from technology and artificial intelligence. But if it's the shortcut just to go, we don't need to get that bloke to design birthday cards now, we don't need to get that woman to do that picture of the sky. It's a bit like I was saying before about it. To me, it's like photography, which is when photography came in, what you had was a lot of artists going, oh, bloody hell, no one needs me now. Because, this person who used to say, I'd like to get a portrait of my family, just goes and sees that person with a box camera. And then, so what you then get out of that is you get artists going cubism, surrealism, Dadaism. You get a whole new, and so I think part of the challenge, to me, well, I mentioned Jimmy Carr, right, who is a comedian who I don't like at all, and I don't like the fact that he says his jokes don't mean anything, because I think a lot of them do. And to me, that my dream of technology is it will mean that any lazy, well, not lazy, he's very diligent in one way, but any artist who's going on the lowest common denominator, the lowest common denominator will be created by an intelligent machine quite quickly. So it means that we should all aspire to create things that, are, well, the machine can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Or again, the machine can be an enabler.
Yeah.
Will encourage. So I know the conversation around us, we always often talk about it. Will it dampen down creativity? Will it stop our imagination? Or can it be an enabler to grow new thoughts, new imagination? If we think about photography, some amateur photographers might take some great shots, but fantastic photographers have great lighting, don't they? And then you think about digital photography. Did the people who had the films think, oh, my life's ruined now, it's all digital and it can all be done on the computer? Well, no, because they're creating even better pictures. It's all evolving.
I think that bit of where, and what we're talking again there, is that's when both are in action with each other. I mean, I think it's very interesting with art. I don't know if anyone knows the work of Robert Rauschenberg, who's an American artist who every time that he won the Venice Biennale for some silk screens he did, so he immediately rang up his assistant, went, destroy all the other silk screens or I'll get stuck in a rut. Right? He didn't want to just, and he often worked with scientists as well. And he also has this thing that his early work, when he first left the army after the Second World War and he went to Paris, are predominantly like kind of almost blank canvases. And yet I've seen other people who've done blank canvases and got nothing from them whatsoever. But there's something, and I knew nothing about Robert Rauschenberg when I went to the exhibition, but there was something. It's that bit, like the unquantifiable thing, which is the fleshiness of the flesh and the fly. It's that unquantifiable thing where, one of his great works was called Erased de Kooning. When William de Kooning was the most famous painter in New York pretty much at the time, and he said, can I have one of your sketches so that I can rub it out? And de Kooning was like, no, you can't. And then eventually, because he was so persistent, he went, all right, and he spent ages just drawing and rub that out. And then Rauschenberg spent a whole month just rubbing it out till there's nothing left, put it in a frame, and it's just called Erased de Kooning, and that's it. And that to me is like, there's other people that have done that and you just go, but with him, there's something about it's the love within, you can see two paintings that are almost exactly the same. But one of them, you go, why is it? And then sometimes you find a few things about that person. You go,
The intent.
what was I sensing there?
Joe.
So you talked a little about emotion and about the importance of human emotion and very much in the art context. But you did also touch when you were sort of showing the Turner about science, and actually you can see it through science, and science takes the emotion out of things, doesn't it? Science is binary. You can prove facts.
Oh no, I disagree.
Okay, that's interesting. But I suppose my question, and you can use it to disagree, is actually, are there not times and applications where actually taking human emotion out is exactly what we need to do? If I think about it from a public service point of view, and I think about the hundreds of kind of decisions that the public services have to make every single day, that should be, really, agnostic of emotion, but the human is incapable of keeping that emotion out. So actually, is there not a role for AI, for digital tools in really sort of countering that human emotion and sort of keeping it as part of the spectrum?
I think it could be an assistant, but I don't think. I mean, what I would say about science is, so there always has to be a level of doubt within science. So even when we can never, it is this, we go, it is this. For now, with the current understanding that we have, I think it gets quite worrying where if we can't make our decisions with the emotions that we have, then to hand it over to a computer, I can see how you can crunch the numbers a bit. But I don't imagine that anything that involves, because there will be a human moment, won't there? You crunch all the numbers, but you won't just go, I'm not even going to look at it. The machine knows. You'll end up looking and you'll still have an emotional relationship with. And I think one of the dangers of science is whenever I see someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson saying science doesn't care about your emotions and these T-shirts, and it's meant to be this kind of bold thing. And I think, well, that's balderdash, because the whole history of science is filled with people who, if you actually look at why they made the decisions they made and why they made the presumptions they did, very often for positive reasons and sometimes for negative reasons, but they came from emotion. So I don't think we can ultimately detach, but we can use it as a calculating machine to look at certain things and go, do you know what, if we do that, we will decrease the amount of homelessness. But then again, even that is going to be partly an emotional decision, because that's why, one of the reasons that we want more people to have shelter.
Yeah. And I suppose the other kind of dimension that does this tool allow us to kind of be a great democratizer, because actually it is putting more information in the hands of more people, where maybe that would have been quite restricted. So I think is that sort of one of the benefits that we need to, yes, there's a lot of information out there, but actually that is hugely kind of empowering if used right.
Well, that's exactly the problem, I think, with the idea of democracy of it, which is, for a brief period of time, I think there was this wonderful idea, and I really believe, this is fantastic. No one's ever had access to so many stories. But then we discover, through various different algorithms and through who actually finances various things, you find out that the top story is not necessarily the most informative story, and it's been, various decisions have been made. So I think that's one of the problems, is one of the things we really need to educate people with, and I think it's getting better, but I still, is critical thinking in the age of the machine. Because I think we saw it all the way during lockdown. We saw some people, there are people I knew who were, as far as I knew, perfectly kind of like smart and interested in many different things, and they came to believe some things which did not stand up to evidence at all, but did stand up to the huge burden of emotional anecdote that was out there. So I think you're right. I think the potential is magnificent, but I think, as we've just seen with this last election, and as we've seen with the idea that Elon Musk is going to finance various different opinions, and hearing Trump say that if you give $1 billion to America, then don't worry about any of the rules on environmentalism. I mean, that's bloody good investment, isn't it? Because you'll be able to get a lot more than $1 billion back on the, and those kind of things. I think I'm surprised at how many people go, oh, actually, I do see that as quite a good idea. So I think we've got this beautiful potential. And that's the thing that I think is the most galling, which is to say, oh my God, we can all look up and we can check. Like I never trust any science book, or most books actually that are factual, that don't have a bibliography at back and a bunch of footnotes. It doesn't matter if I don't read all those footnotes, but I know that that paper exists. And that's the kind of world that we need. But again, I find it, I think in the last couple of years, I've become quite pessimistic at times, because I desperately want to go, look at all these beautiful stories.
So this is a sort of a 5-minute warning for you guys to think of the questions that you're going to ask. But I'm just going to quickly jump in. And one of the things we were talking about before is this kind of absolutism, and just picking up on the point that a lot of science and generally critical thinking requires a level of uncertainty, and it's that chink of uncertainty that the absolutists go after, and then second guess, doubt, build up, and everybody wants the sure thing. They want to believe. So how do you see sort of that's divide between the critical thinkers and the absolutism and the role of AI and creativity in society? Where's that leading us? That's a pretty big question.
It is a very big question.
I know. Yeah,
We've got more than 5 minutes.
yeah. For a Wednesday afternoon before drinks as well.
I mean, I think that we also have a problem sometimes with the critical thinkers who are given, science does have certain people who are a little bit more absolutist than we might wish to believe. I think we saw a lot of that with some of the kind of atheist boom and the religious debates that went on. And I don't think they were nearly as nuanced as they could have been. I think they alienated people that we didn't need to alienate. I think it's a bit like, if I ask someone whether they believe in God or not, right? I'm not going to ask you now, but if anyone, some people in this room may well believe it. But if you answer, I believe in God, a lot of people then shut down the conversation and go, oh, right. But I didn't ask you at the next question, which is, what is your God? What is that experience? And I think that's the bit where you go, there's critical thinking, there's setting up the first set of questions. This is what I need. And then there's working out, well, hang on a minute, this only gets us to point 2. How do I now branch out? Because all of these things become trees, I think. So I think all of these things can exist together and be used together. I think critical thinking, I think we have a real lack of it in the newspapers. And I think if you look at, whenever, I don't read the newspapers very much now, but I'm always, one of the things that I find most difficult is seeing the fact that you go, oh, the morality that existed for that politician is entirely different for, I do believe in a kind of, in trying to have ethics that are for, are universal ethics. And sometimes it's annoying to go, I really like that person. Turns out they're a prick, and you have those moments. But it is, but I think that's I was mentioned to you, Eddie Glaude Jr., who wrote an amazing book. He's a black academic in the US. He wrote a book about how he used the poet James Baldwin to get him through what sadly now is the first Trump administration. But he said a thing that I thought was really interesting. He said, the trouble is when I go onto news shows, I have to pretend the other person is arguing in good faith. And that's one of the things that we really need to fight for, which is we have far too many bad faith people who are in charge of far too much. And when you actually spend time with like my friend Kevin Fong, who is an expert, he's a doctor, he's an expert on space medicine. And some of you might have seen the committee he was on talking about what happened during lockdown. He was involved in managing a lot of the hospitals in London. And he talked about the fact that every single day, he would go to another hospital where a doctor would say, oh my God, it's like dealing with a terrorist attack. And Kevin started to well up at that point. And I know him pretty well, and he's seen a lot of things. And that moment of humanity, and that moment of him talking about that, and I thought, where was that universal coverage of this incredible major story? Perhaps AI would, if we really were, perhaps there is a way of using that in some way.
Mm-hmm. Leticia, did you have a...
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about responsibility as well. If we think and we sort of accept, hopefully acknowledge that it's a tool, we need to have human-centric design, thinking about how we can keep that humanity in there, to keep that empathy and creativity. And I think a lot of people are, in some respects, pushing back, saying it's somebody else's problem to govern it and make it right, and we can say it's all bad. But I'd like to hear about your thoughts on how you feel you could have some responsibility in perhaps embracing the governance of AI. And maybe you could just think about your son. How do you teach him to be responsible?
Well, I think, again, it is about the skepticism that you have as you view things. First of all, is to think, have those rules that have existed. Why is this out there? Who wishes this to be out there? And how much can I check the veracity of that? I think, if we start with that, I think that's a very useful system to have all the time. And yes, this story might look interesting, but let's just work out how likely it is. And then also not to be too bothered about, sometimes there are myths and fantasies and wonderlands, which are also fine to play with and have fun with that. I think sometimes that kind of what can seem like a, Dawkins style thinking seems to, it's sort of they go, oh, the world doesn't need to be wonderful, there don't need to be fairies in the garden for the world to be wonderful. And you go, but you know what? It's all right also just to have some fairies in the garden as well, unless you're saying, and those are the fairies that told me to go and kill. Then we've got a problem with those fairies. But you know what I mean? And I think that's another thing of the complexity. But I think I'm not negative at all towards a lot of these things. It's literally about the thing that I decided to concentrate, because I know quite a few artists who are watching the drop in their work, and I know what they bring. And I also know that some of them, that work could not be done by a machine if it didn't already have the information the images they created. This is why the Society of Authors, there's a thing, we have a lot of writers won't allow any of their work to be used for AI research, because it starts off and it looks like, oh, this is a fun adventure. And the next thing you know, you go, oh, hang on, all this stuff that's being written required your unpaid mind.
Joe.
Can I just come back to the point you made about sort of critical thinking and critical skills? Because I think, that's something that any number of people around this room, I'm sure, have the same conversation with about. Actually, that feels like what's lacking in our talent pipeline, in our workforce, whether it's AI, cyber, we're all looking for critical thinkers. And I suppose my question is sort of, do you think you can teach critical thinking, but actually is there more in the creativity space that actually engenders critical thinking? So actually, is there a parallel that actually, because we aren't prioritizing creative education in the way that we should, we are losing critical thinking, and actually by sort of making more use of technology in the creative space, we miss further undermining that? I say that as a slightly loaded question from a policy perspective, because in Greater Manchester we are really sort of trying to encourage people to take those more creative pathways, to prioritise those creative subjects that have been deprioritised by our education system in favour of academic ones. So interested to sort of see if your perspective, if that's the sort of sensible direction of travel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things we need to do is we need to knock down the walls that place all these things as separate issues, as separate subjects. That bit where we were talking beforehand about the fact that, when you're dealing with, you have, if you look at the curriculum, it goes, here's geography, here's history, here's maths, here's French, right? And you go, well, actually, all of those things, geography influences history, and that influences French, and that you're back and forth. And I think that bit of, and I totally agree with creating more spaces where people are encouraged to experiment. I was up doing that what's that called, the old theatre in Hume. I used to be at jazz theatre, and Nina Simone played there, and I was there, and I saw all of these things on the ground of so many different chances for different members of the community to come in and just make stuff. It's what we were talking before about permission, and I think that's a very important thing, because also, I mean, on a slightly different topic, but we are again seeing in the arts world, you're seeing a decline in terms of working class voices, and you're seeing a decline. You're seeing a number of people who feel that things are not meant for them, and whether that's AI, whether that's I'm going, oh, I am allowed to code. I was in Gould Library recently doing a talk there, and there were just a bunch of kids there, young kids, and they were being taught coding by the librarian there, and they were having such an amazing time. And some of them may well go off and be coders, and some might just had a really great hour every Thursday when they were there. And I think, all of those different ways of what arms us, again, going back to that words of empathy thing, is the more stories that we have, the more ways that we have of understanding, the more understanding that we have that we're not an objective species, we're a subjective species, but that doesn't give an equality of every subjective story. But it does mean that the moment that we go back to that binary, this is true and this is false, then I think that will end up excluding, and I think it's where, kind of dogmatism grows from. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So now it's over to you guys, the wonderful and beautiful audience that we have in front of us. Hope you've written down all your great questions. So who wants to go first? There you go. Thank you very much.
Great presentation. It's really thought-provoking. I guess I'd like to get your sense of, you talk about how AI is an absence of a sense of self or imagination or spontaneity and so on. Well, just love to get your sense of whether or not you see these as being soluble problems, or whether there's something fundamental about their properties, like I said.
Well, I think one of the most exciting things about AI is that as we go further with it, we will have a greater understanding of what makes consciousness, what makes human consciousness. That I do find really interesting because, there are lots in that same way, when you have people talking about chess machines being able to beat humans, but the chess machine doesn't go yay at the end. The chess machine doesn't gloat at you. The chess machine has no experience of victory. And I think it was the other day was saying, I can't remember who it was now, was talking about the fact that no one watches two chess. Well, some people probably do, but generally, you still want to watch two humans playing chess. But I think it's very interesting to go, what do we learn about? It's a bit like with Jane Goodall and chimpanzees. Jane Goodall learned incredible things about chimpanzees that no one knew beforehand, using techniques which were not the official scientific techniques as well, which is why she was. But what we then discovered a lot was about our own behaviour. And I think with AI, one of the interesting things, which is why I really must keep making clear, I'm not like negative towards it as a notion or as something to be used, but as you said, a tool. The tool is such an important thing. So I think, yes, I think there is a real, there are possibilities of understanding our consciousness. And I think one of the most important things as well is for us to understand the fragility of it. I think that's one thing that we kind of fail at the moment is, we're looking at increasing extreme weather, for instance. And not enough people are just, I think every human being, should, in every meeting place, there should be that image Earthrise, which is the Earth being looked at from the moon. Because I think that bit of just giving us some sense of perspective. In the same way, I think what AI can do is give us some sense of the perspective of how ridiculous and strange it is that we are a creature with an inner life. And then there's another thing which is not about AI at all, but I think is also one of the things we need. When I was saying about the bit that people get very scared sometimes about actually expressing themselves, because maybe their political thing will lead to, a lot of people attacking them or whatever, and therefore they can, or indeed about their emotion. And something kind of we were talking a little bit about, which is what we really need to do before we unmask the machines is unmask ourselves. We will be such a healthier society when we are talking in good faith, not bad faith. When we are able to be honest with each other. We are living in a time, and probably always have done, where honesty is actually something that people find quite, a lot of workspaces and stuff. So everyone needs to have their secret. Because if someone hasn't got a secret, what do you got on them? That's So I think there's sorry, it's answering about 5 different questions, but I think that is part of. So yes, I think it might be soluble, but I think it's going to take it's a bit like when I showed you that brain scan, and when the human genome was sequenced, people went, "Wow, we know," and then everyone went, "No, what's happened is we've been given all the letters to the novel Ulysses, and now we have to try and turn it all into sentences." And that's what we currently have with our understanding of our own brains, which is we can see, the amygdala, and we can see the frontal lobes, the hypothalamus, and all that, but actually we're not able to observe generally why we behave as we do in the day-to-day way. You might if you've got a bit. So I think the journey that we make from the brain scan and the circuitry that is created to create artificial intelligence there is a possibility, but I don't know if we've got enough time, because I just think it's going to take, the moment someone's got consciousness, it's going to be an interesting day, isn't it?
Thank you. So who's going to be brave next? Come on, need more questions, otherwise you're not going to get a free alcohol. Go on then. I'll come around. Thanks.
Thank you. You talked and touched on it a little bit now. I mean, to children that are growing up today, a very different world, certainly to when I grew up, no mobile phone, no internet, all those sorts of things. How can we ensure, as parents and educators, etc., but they actually understand that not all that they're seeing is real or believable, not all is true. They're on social media 24/7. The algorithms pick up, they like particular things, so we'll pick up on it. And actually what they're picking up is not all real life. How can we ensure it goes back to that critical thinking? How do you think we can ensure they could be understand what's out there?
I think it might not be the children. I think it might be my generation. I think the generation that grew up and then got these tools has ended up not having any of the required armament to deal with it. I certainly noticed with my 16-year-old son, the way that he approaches these things, because they've always been there, is different to a bunch of people I've seen around my age, some of whom have gone and believed the most crazy crank stuff. And in the same way, I think it's such an alluring thing, the phone. There's a friend of mine who's a primary school teacher, and all of the year ones had spent the whole afternoon doing these paintings. And then she looked out the window as they were walking away, and they were all holding out their paintings, and their parents were all looking at their phones. And she called them all in the next day and told off all the parents. I said, do you know what? And so I think that disconnect is not necessarily a generational problem. I think the disconnect is very broad. And I think we all, I certainly fall for it. I should never have spent time on Twitter. Looking back, it started off with this fun tool that we had for larking about. And then suddenly it kind of, became this, there's certain things. And the problem is to believe that what you see online is the world. And I think that's what happens a lot, which is you will see on certain topics, you say, oh my God, this thing's trending and it's crazy. And then you actually, I'm lucky, I spend every day in a different room, normally, sometimes 3 different rooms, and some of them are libraries and some of them are cafes and some of them, and so I get to meet people from lots of different backgrounds and lots of different ages. And I see their opinions are very rarely reflected in what's actually trending on something like Twitter. And very often they're much more open and much more progressive. But unfortunately, our politicians, I think, are the ones we should really worry about, because I think they're so scared of something that isn't the correct amount of clickbait. Not all of them. Your mayor's good. I do actually like your mayor, by the way. It's really, really come through very well, I think. A nice battling person. So, yeah, no, he's great. I like him. Not all the people in his party at the moment. Some of them have been a bit slack. Anyway, so that's not his fault. He's doing very well here. But yeah, I think that thing of going, if we allow, as we've seen with Musk, if we allow a small group of people to create the illusion that this is apart from anything else, it becomes contagious, and people who really could believe all manner of different things go, oh no, I think I'm going to, because we do always follow, a lot of us,
So this side of the room's doing very well. What about that side of the room in terms of questions? Yes, right. Okay, so I've got a bit of a trek. Hold your horses.
You talked about capitalism and just following up that point there about Musk. What do you think about ownership of these models? Considering that at the moment it costs $500 million to train one of these things, and there's only a small number of businesses or organizations that to do it. Who do you think should own them and control them?
It'll never happen. You know what? I think we've fallen. I remember Slavoj Žižek saying, that people have always been apologizing about communism and socialism, and maybe it's time capitalism started apologizing now, because I think we no longer even have a system that's really capitalism, because we have a system which is, really hostile ownership system, which doesn't, and very often rewards people who've not, if we think of the water companies and things like that, it's not even about what you actually do. So, in my perfect world, which won't be happening ever, the only time I think we can see us having longevity is when the borders no longer mean anything. I really think, Carl Sagan, the pale blue dot, when he talks about looking at the Earth, from the perspective of, it's still within the solar system, yet we're a tiny pale blue dot. And he says, that's here, that's us, on it, everyone you've ever known, everyone who ever lived here on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Think of all the bloodshed, so men could be the momentary master of a fraction of a dot. And I fear that the way that we are set up, I think there's loads of brilliant people, by the way. This is not like an anti-humanity thing, but unfortunately, many of those who rise to positions of control are somewhere between narcissistic personality disorder and psychopathy. And until we start deciding that there's not a huge disparity in how much everyone's worth. Just think everyone here has actually got a price on their head. Like when every year there's a kind of totting up of how much the population's worth and how little anyone over 80 is worth. All of those things are part of the mathematics of being human. And until we break down that idea of the most money being your victory, and of saying, oh no, but you put a lot of work into this, so you deserve this huge amount, but your workers don't, by the way. So what always worries me about all these people who want to build something on Mars, which I think is really absolute nonsense, by the way, that idea, the idea that we're going to, and then we're all going to live on Mars. No, what we're going to do is we're going to make a very similar planet to Mars here, possibly. But sorry, it's a roundabout way of saying I think at the moment we have no system whatsoever that is fit for purpose for the level of technological control that is out there. And I don't know how we're going to get it. And I would love there to be, I think if we had a truly informed people and we really started to go, do you know what, those people do deserve more money. And that person doesn't really deserve that money. And maybe we can work out a different set of priorities of what it is to be human. But I think it requires, and I think it will take something seismic. I think it will take something where many, many lives are lost. And because I'm finding it very interesting watching the climate change thing, because every single month, pretty much, we see an event that is, in some part of the world, a once in a century event. And that's still not making us go, hang on a minute, these fossil fuel companies, well, the technology exists and it will affect their profits. And I think with that's our mindset. Does that sound too negative? But I mean, I want people to change, and I meet so many fucking amazing, I meet these incredible people who are trying so hard. When I'm with some of the Just Stop Oil people, when I think of those people who are in prison for peaceful protest, or not even protest, planning a peaceful protest, all of those things seem to me to show a society that isn't. I think we've become, if anyone's a fan of RoboCop, the original, not the terrible remake, Omnicore. The Omnicore, there's a speech in Omnicore about, we go into areas where people didn't realize you could make profit. Hospitals, prisons, and the whole speech they do, you go, tick, tick, tick. Why are more people put in prison in America? Why was there a huge number of increased incarcerations from the 1990s onwards? Because of the privatization of prisons, and there was money to be made there. I mean, man, it's crazy stuff. That's why I hate conspiracy theorists. They look at all the wrong things. It's not the lizards. It's just us. I think I think that's the thing. Educating people is really, in the same way we were talking about this with science, which is quite often with the kind of various different areas of science where people haven't realised that it's really good to have one person in the lab who is great at going out and speaking to anyone about what's being done. And that bit of having the public spokesperson, that person who is able to go out and say, right, this is what we're building and this is why we're building it. And I'm offering you these questions because I think very often when there are things that some people in a big company might go, hang on a minute, that will affect the profits or whatever, but you might not go, oh, hang on a minute, actually, that really improves the way that we're building these things. And actually these positive sides. So I think it is having different ways of properly getting out there, not in just that old kind of, remember those ICI public information films about, lead paint or whatever. But yeah, I think that's the thing is to be, I mean, I love the idea, and I know this is Dr. Ben Goldacre, he came up with that thing called all trials a while ago, which was the fact that all trials should be published when it came, this was particularly about medicine, but going, if you put everything out there, as opposed to just immediately going, don't put that one out there because that'll affect the bottom line. Actually, you may well find that putting everything out there will affect the bottom line in a good way, in a positive way. So I think a lot of people behind closed who are worried about sharing these things, I think. And I think they're putting more money into education, putting money into people who are going into schools or libraries or wherever it might be. So libraries are always great because you get, older people there as well. And to make sure that everyone understands what's going on. My dad was always, he was 92 when he died, and he always kept up to date, and he'd have his Google alerts and tell me when I had a bad review from a gig in Peterborough. And but yeah, I think that bit of making sure that everyone's armed with knowledge is really important.
So one last question from me, and then maybe some more from folks up here. What's going to be the next generation's mum and dad can't program the VCR?
Oh, isn't it amazing? VCR. I mean, like I remember showing my son a Betamax video recorder, and I might as well have shown him a plough. Because everything exists in the. I mean, it's an interesting thing of the speed. When you watch a child and the speed in which they can type is a really great thing. So what's going to be the next one?
Yeah,
I think it's going to be very hard because one, we've had removed from us the idea of being able to mend anything. So like my dad and my mum and some of you here anyway as well will know that if something used to break in the house, they'd take the back off it, and now everything's kind of become magic in its way. It's in a sealed box, and I feel that actually is quite a negative thing as well, because it means that we are genuinely detached from the very technology that we're using because we have no understanding of it. And I think with everything being in the cloud, we've already made that leap now. Nothing is tangible. All that's solid melts into Netflix.
Yeah, I think it's good. Mum and dad is shouting too loud at the house. That's going to be the like. If you don't need to speak so loudly to the assistant in the house.
See, I can't do any of that stuff. I would never have any of that. I was so analog in that way. I can still close the door for myself. Do you know what? I've found none of the rooms are so big that by saying turn the lights on, I feel I won't get me 1,000 steps in if I don't take the 7 steps to actually pressing the switch.
That's very good. Any more follow-up questions from up here?
I guess it's just an observation that, and no need to get too deep into it, but it's about trust, isn't it? We talk about how can we trust AI, and one of the things you mentioned about some of the stories that were created that kind of touch people's hearts as soon as they realised it was a lie. They didn't. However, if it was intended as fiction in the first place, it still could have touched their hearts, but it's because they were deceived. So the trust in anything that's AI, the trust in technology, but then also the trust in us as big organizations in educating people. Do they trust us because we're also trying to sell the product perhaps? And will they trust spokespeople in front of the public like you? So how do we kind of make sure that we are trustworthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think trust is such because you're right. If there's one thing, especially when you've got a group who've decided that they want to turn against you, it only takes one thing that wasn't quite right. We see that with governments. We see lots of things where often they might fall not over the correct thing that they should have thought. There's a sudden reason why a certain piece of information is brought out to bring that particular group down. So I really do believe in, and again, when I was mentioning about neurodivergence, if I did get around to that, it's quite an interesting thing because neurodivergent people, you see a lot of it in autism and ADHD. There really is this kind of why lie? And very often when you open a conversation with someone, people go, "What? This is not how we open conversations. We say, 'How are you?' with no real interest in it, and then mention something that's a box set or whatever it might be." Whereas I remember meeting someone called Jo, who's become a friend of mine. The first time I ever met her, I saw her tap dancing in a show, and I went straight up to her and I said, "Your tap dancing was amazing. I'm currently doing a show in which I'll read out from Mills and Boon books from the 1970s about farmers. Some of them are about lighthouse keepers as well. And I thought the rhythm of your tap dancing would really enhance some of the romantic scenes in some of those novels. Would you like to join in?" And she went, "Yes, I would." And it's only later, now that we've both been diagnosed, we found out that's not a neurotypical opening. But I think that bit of the transparency, I love when someone has a secret, and I think, and also so many of the secrets people hold are burning them up inside when they don't have to. I'm always so I do. Again, I'm extremely naive in that way. And that naivety also comes from the fact that I meet so many people every week who have such incredible stories of such honesty. And again, it goes back to the less we mask, the less we hide, whether as an organization or, as individuals, I think we become a much healthier society. And that's not what we've been experiencing in the last, few years. And I also know that everyone who works, there's very rarely you go to a company and go, "Oh, that's the evil bloke who does all the evil stuff." Just like, the AI will take over the world. It's not like that, and it's that bit of encouraging everyone to go, don't hide it.
Elon Musk, that.
Yeah. Oh, no, no, you're right. Yeah, there is. Yeah, there are some evil. Yeah. Not keen on Basil from bloody Mars.
You started off with a kind of provocation of how do we preserve human imagination, and I suppose what it made me think in the context of the conversation we've had today is actually how do you preserve human concentration, because actually there's so much going on, and this is a very live debate now, but actually soon it'll become just normal and we'll forget about it. We were talking earlier about COVID. We thought it was going to be this big game changer. We all behaved differently for about a year, and now we're all back exactly where we are, coughing on each other. So actually how do we maybe sort of preserve concentration to keep focused on these really big issues that we've talked about today?
There's a great book called Amusing Ourselves to Death by a man called Neil Postman. This was in the early 80s, the early days of Reagan. And one of the things he said, you should cut down the number of opinions you have by a third. And that's probably now 2/3, I reckon, because we've got so. And I really do. I try, and some days I think, hang on, I don't need to know about this. I don't need an opinion on that person. I don't need to be cross about that. You know, when someone gets angry about Taylor Swift, well, we'll just ignore it. Just, you don't have to be angry about Taylor Swift. You know, and so I think one of the things is to think quite specifically about why do I want to read this story, or why do I want to know this? And then go, oh, I don't need to. It's not going to, nothing's going to change in my world by going, oh, I don't like that Taylor Swift, or whatever it might be. And I think it is, sometimes you have to really bring it into the forefront of your of your thinking, where you suddenly go, why am I watching this, or why am I doing, you know, and that's what. And I do think connection is the most important thing, which is, I really, you know, without with E.M. Forster and Only Connect, but I really, that bit when you're, you know, walking down here, going down, I always take different streets when I walk through Manchester. I've probably been through nearly all of them now, but you'll find something different there. You'll connect with something different then, rather than looking at your phone or getting into an argument with someone. And I spent far too long sometimes arguing with people, thinking, why have I even bothered with this? And very often it starts off with good intentions, and then you realise that both of you are bad actors in this particular part. So I think it's, we have, in one way, we've never had so much time in you know, in terms of the number of things that we don't have to do anymore, and yet we have to keep finding ways of saying, like shopping to me is one of the weirdest things, when you see people at the weekend all going, oh God, I'm going to go shopping. Ugh. Why? You don't have to. You can do something else if you want. But we've turned what was meant to be a joy, won't it be nice to go shopping for, you know, some new things, to, oh God, I've got to go shopping for some new things. And I think it's finding that, you know, I mean, I do think very, as someone who doesn't believe in an afterlife, I think, God, there's not very long. So what am I going to do? I want to go there, I want to see that, I want to have that adventure. I'm going to stare at that wall for a while. I love staring at walls. Very big fan of that, because I love seeing where bits of nature have started to grow out of the wall, and you think the human beings just went, ha ha, we've built the wall, and then nature went, you left a crack, and then something grows out of it. So I think that's the other thing, which is very often what is meant to be mundane and banal is, the more you look at it, the more beautiful it becomes. And I think that's the, you know, I love that Charles Darwin's last book, he mentioned it, you know, it was all about earthworms. And people might just think, earthworms, what about it? It's brilliant. And it changed, and you suddenly go, the earthworms, you know, when you're walking in the field, they're under there, and they're doing these incredible things. And in fact, in some ways, I think that is, mentioning nature, I think that's such an important thing, which is to, and I mean, in a city nature as well, any nature, any of those cracks in the wall, any of those things growing out of the pavement, you know, when you see a little, like a daisy growing out of the crack of the pavement, you can look down at that and just go, wow, here is this different color, all these colors. See, I'm a bit of a hippie, really.
Well, thank you very much. So Joe and Leticia, and to Robin, thank you.